Steve, it's time to get to the heart and soul of Serum, which is the Wavetable editor. Can you show us how you use the editor to manipulate sound, create your own frames, do sound design, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. I could probably make a whole series of tutorials just on the Wavetable editor. It goes pretty deep. Once again, you access it by this pencil tool that you'll see on the Wavetable.
Yes.
It brings up the Wavetable editor, and this is the place where we can do all sorts of things to create and manipulate waveforms, to create our own wavetables. And so one thing that you can do just by default is import in sounds. It's probably the easiest way, and ultimately probably the most satisfying way, just importing in sound sources and putting new life into them, making them sound nothing like the original sound, potentially. As an example, here's just a sound on my hard disk, which is sort of like a unison-y kind of sounding saw sort of sound. It helps if we know what pitch that is. So I'm going to, you can hear it's a C, right? So now that we know it's a C, we can type that in here on the formula parser. You'll see it. The formula actually tells us this in the mouse over help. You can enter a note number, e.g. C1, for Serum to convert this to the nearest number of samples. So it's sort of like a calculator. I'll type in C1. That's right. So now we've sort of told Serum that we wish to drag in a sound, and we've told it that we want to split this at C1. And so now it's told us, oh, well, that's 674 samples is the closest number of samples for C1. So now I'm going to drag this in. I'm not sure it's C1. It sounds like that to my ears, but we'll find out here. It looks like, well, it got the thing about right, but I think you could argue maybe that that's 2 cycles each, but I think that's pretty good. I'm going to leave it at C1.
Yeah.
So you can see it did a pretty good job, and when I say it did a pretty good job, it's because we see that there's this part of the waveform that really stays constant, right? We can see that even though the sound, of course, changes over time, we're not seeing anything like the overall wave isn't scrolling left to right. We can see this sort of valley down here is sort of staying in that place as I animate between these tables. So it did a good job of importing it. We got the pitch right. If we saw some drift, we could type in a number here in samples if we wished to make it import this at slightly larger or slightly smaller sizes. So the rule of thumb there is if you drag this wavetable position up, and as you're dragging it up, you see this drift to the right. I think of right being sort of like more.
So if the hump begins to move this way.
Yeah, if it's moving to the right, then type in a bigger number. Maybe we try 680, something like that. Conversely, if we are dragging this wavetable value up and we see the waveform kind of scrolling to the left, that would mean less. So I might try 665 samples or something like that.
That's a good tip.
And that helps you. You know, it's not always entirely necessary to do that, because even with a little motion, it still can be okay. But that's really the main thing, is you just drag in the sound, and in a sense, you can almost be done at that point. We can move around in the sound.
And then how many frames did it actually create off this import?
We got what looks like 36 frames, except we see that the end of this sample, this audio file maybe wasn't the best trimmed file, and we can see there's a bunch here that we don't really need. In fact, these really kind of fading out ones I don't really care about much. I'm just going to select from this really basically quiet one, and now I'm shift-clicking at the very end. And now I'm going to say remove multi-selection. And that's just going to get rid of those tables, and now we're down to just 28 tables here.
Great. But Serum allows you to have 256 frames tables in here. So how can we turn these 28 frames into two? Because I imagine if you play these back, if you're cycling through them slowly, you may hear some jumps.
Yeah, if we hold down this note, this one seems like it's pretty decent. There's nothing too drastic from what I can hear. But yeah, you hear the steps clearly. So if we were using an LFO and moving really slowly, of course, we would hear these steps, and that might not be desirable. So
can we fill in the gaps?
So we can fill in the gaps. So we use the morph page, and we can do it either with crossfading or with spectral morph. I tend to like to start with the spectral morph. Crossfade really just is the blend volume-wise between 2 adjacent tables, and it's filling in the dots by just making a mixed version of those 2. But when you do this mixing, you can get phase cancellation, right? This left table might have had some certain phase of a certain frequency, and the right table might have that out of phase at that frequency. So as you crossfade between it, you're going to hear that frequency cancel itself. In other words, that harmonic will disappear and then come back as you get to the next table. The spectral morph, what that's doing is it's actually mixing all of the harmonics together. So we have the fundamental, the octave, and all of those are actually the amount is being crossfaded for every single harmonic, and every phase of every harmonic is shifting as well. So we get a true spectral morph. So I'm going to select that here. And now you can see that this goes up to 256 instead of the original number that we had of 28.
And now cycle through that slowly again, like we were doing earlier. And now there's less of a noticeable rhythmic jump or...
That's right. It's really pretty smooth.
Very cool. And now you can just choose to play just one of these frames or move through the frames with modulators like you're doing now.
Yes, exactly, we can do that. So that's a really fun way. You can just bring in any sound like I just did there, especially if you know the pitch or if you have a folder of notes at the same pitch. It's really easy just to kind of fly through, find cool stuff. Whole variety of different things you could do. You could find one cycle, and if you like it, you could copy that over to the other oscillator and repeat that process on some sounds. So you could make your own custom table with a few different shapes. But using wave files as food or as source for the Wavetable editor is a lot of fun.
Question, so this is something that we imported with a constant pitch. What if we have something where the pitch is changing? Is there some type of strategy that we could use for it to analyze it?
You can, yeah. I don't think I have a sound readily available that does that, but basically the concept there is what you would use is the import here that says dynamic pitch zero snap.
Nice, and the difference is that you're importing into this window versus bringing it in the other window.
It's actually one and the same, yeah. If we cleared this out, we would see those same options.
Okay, good to know.
Options.
There they are, same thing.
Yeah, so there's actually the two different options if you have a pitch that changes. Even just saying your voice, like, hello, I am Steve, you know, it has a natural pitch change to it. So using this pitch average feature or trying to type in a note would never give us great results because it's not going to slice it. It's going to be slicing at the same point, and then we're going to be the waveform's going to sort of slide all over the place.
Right.
One of these two is going to use a dynamic frame size, as you see the word dynamic there. In other words, it's varying the size of capture for every single one of these frames.
Based on how it believes the cycle of each frame is changing, right?
That's right, so it's analyzing the pitch. Both of these generate a pitch map, sort of like you'd see on an auto-tune type program where you see this pitch contour. So it first does a pass and generates a pitch map, and then it goes through and figures out, well, how long do I want to capture and from where for each frame. The difference being this first one tries to snap to zero crossings, which is sort of better for more simple waveforms, like if you had an analog square wave that was bending a little or a sawtooth or something like that, and you really just want it to cut at the same location in the waveform over and over. It's not going to work as well for complex material that's got a lot of crazy zero crossings because it's going to start jumping a bit.
So that's a little tip on when you would use one versus the other.
Yeah, for something even as complex as the human voice, the pitch follow is probably going to be a better option of the two.
Cool.
And then specifically for something like speech, these FFT options down at the bottom might be really good as well. So these FFT options are a sort of a third import type, and they're kind of unique versus these other ones, where what's going on with the FFT is it's taking slices of time and it's looking at what's going on in the frequency domain in that slice of time.
In terms of an average, would you?
Yeah, in terms of average of what's going on in that slice, and then it resynthesizes a waveform based on what it's analyzed there, and then does the same thing for another slice of time that's sort of overlapping with that previous one. And so it's really like a resynthesizer. It's creating new waveforms. It's not going to look like any signal you saw in the exact wave file, but it's going to sound like it. So you're going to have stuff that does sound like your original waveform.
Cool. What if you don't want to drag in a waveform and you would like to experiment, just draw your own waveforms, or how would we go about doing that in Serum?
Yeah, it's really easy. I'll just go back to init here, which we can do under add, remove, init all.
Okay.
We're back to this default saw wave. And what we can do here is we can just draw with the mouse on this waveform area. We have these tools down the left.
Nice.
And these tools allow us to select a different shape. And the size of the shape that's drawn is based on our grid sizes, which are down here in the bottom right. So we have a vertical and a horizontal grid. And we can control these simultaneously with Shift if we want to keep them the same.
Very cool.
We can put it to 0 if we want to free draw. I decided to let Serum still have a grid there just so you have a frame of reference. But you can see it says 0 and we're free drawing. And then we can go up. We can also, of course, use these different grid sizes. And these different grid sizes are useful for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons that they're really useful is for bringing out certain harmonic attributes, because if you think the grid is really a division of the perfect cycle, and that's the same way that sort of harmonics work, right? So for instance, if I have, 8 would sort of be like a couple octaves up. So if I draw something like this, you can see that sounds like it's an octave, 2 octaves up above that.
Right.
So that's useful. Or if I use 6, that's like a ratio, like a perfect fifth. So you can kind of hear that fifth being blended into the waveform. So
very cool.
That's where these grids can be really handy for getting some of those harmonics out. And then you can do a variety of other things with these shape tools. One of them that's great is this noise tool. That's a great way to add in some like harmonic energy into the sound. So you can draw and use up and down to set the depth. So we can get it, can kind of undo it, so to speak, or add more back in.
That's really cool. You could bring, and you can do this to a sound that you've imported as well, not just to one that you've drawn.
Yeah, that's right. So you can be combining some of the noise. And the fact that this is repeating as part of this short little waveform makes it so it's not like noise like using the noise oscillator.
It's almost pitched, right? Because it's following the cycle, right?
Exactly. It ends up being like a pitched noise. The human ear is really amazing at being able to hear the repeating pattern and starts thinking of it as timbre more than as some sort of just chaos.
So one of the things that I did as soon as I got my hands on the synth is I started drawing just random shapes. I wasn't thinking in terms of harmonics and cycles, although you can do that, and just listening to my ear to find things that I found interesting. And then I would actually go to another frame, create a completely different wave shape, and then use your morph feature to interpolate all the frames in between that. And then there was always magic that I found in between those two positions.
Great, yeah, that's fun. I mean, an example of that we could do is just, we could have this square like that, and we could add another one and start adding some of this noise in. And we could do another with even more noise. And maybe one more with just crazy noise.
Yeah.
So now we have these 4 frames. And then we could morph like you were talking.
Very cool.
Yeah, and that can be neat. There's all sorts of fun things you can do there. You can rearrange these tables, and there's a lot of process options that we have as well to be able to manipulate the tables.
What else can we do inside this editor?
Yeah, so another thing that's really neat with this editor is you can use these formula functions to generate your own perfect shapes. And so there's a little bit of math involved, but you don't really need to go deep into the math because we have presets as well that you can just sort of play around with if you want. So we have 2 separate folders you can see here in this formula menu. There's singles and there's multis. And you can actually add your own, but you have to go into a text editor to do that, to have your own show up as additional folders here. The singles are formulas that just act upon whatever current wavetable is selected. In other words, it's just a single frame. So you can see I selected one there, which says sine of x is the math formula. And what that's saying is we're either going to be -1 or we're going to be 1. And as x goes from -1 through 1 gradually, instead we're left with a square wave. So that's why that one was named square. It's just for generating a square wave. Sine wave, simple math relatively. Sine of x times pi gives us a sine wave plotted. So
I'm glad you have those because it would be hard to free draw,
Yeah, it would be hard to free draw that. There's another quick way to get a sine out, which is you can do that with just drawing the first harmonic here in the harmonic editor. So that's another cool thing you can do with Serum up here is use this harmonic editor, which has some sort of tucked away features as well by right-clicking over here on the...
Good to know. I hadn't found that feature yet, so...
Yeah, you can do some neat things with that. So that's fun. The formulas are fun. And then you can also use these formulas. It's sort of a super power user thing, but you can actually process wavetables. So you could import a sound and then process them using a formula. So this allows you, and there's a couple different ways you can do this, but one of the cool ones is that you can process it sort of like a batch processing spectrally up here. So we can do a spectral process on all of our wavetables. And so an example of that would be this one that says squarify. And what squarify is going to be doing is it's going to be removing every second harmonic. So we're left with only the odd harmonics. Hence squarify, because if you think of a square wave, right, as just the odd harmonics. So if I squarify this waveform here.
That's hard to say, right? Squarify.
That's right. So now you can see this visual up here. You can see that only every other harmonic is added. And I could now normalize this if I wanted to. And now we have a sort of a squarey version of what we had before.
But you still have some of the innate character of the original wave shape that you altered.
Yeah, and so it can be particularly neat if you have a whole set of wavetables and that now you squarify it, you're left with this weird version that's very cool for sort of certain like Nero styles and stuff like that.
Steve, let's say we just created a set of wavetables or a single frame. How do I save that? Where does that go?
Right, when you've made something and you're happy with it, all you need to do is go out of the Wavetable editor.
Okay.
You can export it from there if you wanted to, but you can go out of the Wavetable editor and you'll see it says custom here, and you can see this blue area, which is just letting us know that something's been edited.
Can you rename it there?
And this disk is appearing. It'll get named when you save it. So as soon as we save it, it brings us right up to our user folder, and we could name it whatever we want, Drawn 1, and now we'll see it says Drawn 1 there in the menu. And now that's going to be instantly available for any of our other Wavetable, or anytime we load up Serum in the future, we're going to get that same Wavetable out.
Real quickly, what's the difference between the top part of this graph and the bottom part of this graph?
On the top graph here, we have these stocks that represent the amount of harmonics that make up the waveform. So the leftmost one here is the fundamental, and this next one here would be twice that frequency, in other words, the octave. We can notice 2 signs when I bring that up. The third, which you can see is 3, of course, and so on and so forth. So you can see what I've done is highlighted the octaves in gray. So 8, 16, 32, you can see all like that, because these are all the doublings based on the fundamental that we hear.
Very useful.
Yeah, so we know where those octaves are. So if you drew something just on those octaves, it would sound kind of organ-like. If I had just one oscillator on. So. So there's all the octaves. And then we have the second bin row below, which is the phase. And so you can see as I move this, the phase is shifting.
Got it. Right.
And so this is for each individual bin. So this next one up here on the octave is going to just nudge between 0 and 50% of the total, or 0 and 100% of the relative phase for this harmonic. So it's worth experimenting around with the phases, because it does change the tone of the sound based on how different harmonics are canceling each other out. Especially noticeable if you start, say, clipping the waveform or something like that, because obviously we're going to have a different shape and therefore a different peak amount. So even if the harmonic content stays the same, especially when you're processing the waveform later, it can really change the sound of it. So fun stuff can be had just by randomizing phase and doing a variety of tables that all have the same harmonic content with different phase shifts. Yeah, a lot of possibilities there for exploring and experimenting with. And as I mentioned before, there's some sort of advanced features you can do with control clicking, like setting it to only allow you to draw on even or odd harmonics, or shifting things up an octave or down, which just really fans these out, as you can see. And you can see how that made the waveform happen twice. And so some fun things that you can do between those. It's an easy way to low-pass filter a sound too if you had drawn something down here. This curvy arrow here is worth mentioning, which is what brings this up to the harmonic bin. So if we want to edit it spectrally, we click this, and now we have that sound brought up here as harmonics. Say I don't want any of the high frequencies, I could control click any point or right click any point and say clear HF, in other words, low pass filter. Get rid of those highs. And then if I wanted to do it more extremely, I could say do it down here. And you can see now the waveform is low passed out, it's smoothed out, and we don't have any of that buzz left on it. So that's an easy way to low pass filter at a certain depth. So a lot of fun stuff you can do here in the spectral editor, and it's a great way to sort of learn about sound as well. I've actually found this useful for analyzing stuff, working with a friend of mine, and he really wanted this certain low end that was on this particular track. And what we did is we brought a kick drum that we found in the track into Serum, and we could actually analyze the wave cycle. I mean, you saw it, and it looked like sort of it was like an 808 kind of sound, and it had this sort of like rounded rectangle quality to it a bit. But with Serum in this spectral view, we could just click this curvy arrow and bring it up here, and we were able to analyze exactly how much there was. It ended up being something like this, of course, primarily fundamental, but it had a little bit of first harmonic, and first overtone, and a little bit of third harmonic, second overtone. Wow. So it ended up being, it was something like that, where we had a little more than that, and it was just made of really fat kick drum, basically. So this is a great way to sort of analyze as well and learn a bit about what makes a sound tick that you like.
Cool, Steve. Amazing job on the synth. I think you, as we said earlier, you've included the manual, so a lot of these concepts in the editor are also included in the manual if you want to go a little deeper. Yeah. Can you let people know where they can go to acquire the synth? And also, you have a forum where people are talking about it, posting up wavetables that they've created. I mean, you're creating a whole community around the synth, right? That's right. The community's been really cool. There's been a lot of music being shared on there, which is exciting.
which I haven't seen with my other plugins. There's a lot of presets and users contributing their own like free banks and putting them up there, and wavetable sets from sampling old classic synths and putting those up there. So it's a great community that's available for the customers. The website is Xfer Records. That's Xfer Records, all one word. Xferrecords.com. You go there, you can download the demo version of Serum, and you can contact me on the contact form. It goes right to me, and I'm around to answer any questions.
You are the Serum tech support.
That's right.
Again, thank you for coming down and sharing your amazing synth with us, and we hope that you're inspired to go and design sounds that potentially no one has ever heard before.